let's begin by introducing our panel here, all experts in their own right on the subject we'll be talking about this evening. If I could start with, on my right, James Fergusson, who is a journalist, a foreign correspondent, and has written extensively on Afghanistan. He's written two books on the country. Here on my left, a face you probably all recognise, Alastair Leithead, the BBC's Kabul correspondent. And James Apatharai, hope I pronounced that right.
Not bad.
Yeah. A NATO spokesperson who will hopefully be giving us the point of view of ISAF, the NATO-led forces in Afghanistan, and the work they are doing there. And finally, John D. McHugh, who is very renowned, well, yes you are, photojournalist, and he will be talking about his experiences. He's just come back from Afghanistan, embedded with US forces on the Pakistani border. Now, the question that we are discussing this evening is, of course, are the Taliban winning? Now, I myself haven't spent as much time as my colleagues here in the country, but I was there last year, which was the bloodiest year since 2001. And speaking to people on the ground there in Afghanistan, the main priorities for them and the main issues that they have, which I'm sure we'll be bringing up later, civilian deaths caused by NATO-led forces, also the Americans, a weak government, a weak, corrupt government, which they're extremely angry about. And for them, it's not so much that the Taliban is becoming stronger, but the Taliban is seeming stronger because the Afghan authorities, the government, is so weak. Those are my observations, but I think we should go around the panel and ask our panel what they think, and we'll start with Alastair here on my left. Alastair, the question is, are the Taliban winning?
No, I don't think the Taliban are winning, but then again, neither is the government of Afghanistan, neither are international forces. Bit of a cop-out answer. I suppose definitions, first of all, what is Taliban? That's a big question that we've got to ask here, because you bring in criminality. Taliban, as far as I'm concerned, is anything from your farmer who's paid X amount, small amount of dollars per day by the Taliban to fight, to Mullah Omar. It branches off into those who are linked with Al-Qaeda, it branches off into criminals with drug warlords, the whole lot. And we always say Taliban because it's a shorthand way of describing what's going on there. I think in many parts of the country it is a right thing to say. Certainly in the south and the east, we should call them Taliban. What is winning all about, whether it be from the international community or from the Taliban side? I'd suggest that winning for the international forces is not losing for long enough to allow Afghanistan to come up with something that is going to be self-sustainable, that is going to be not resulting in Afghanistan becoming what it was before, the haven for Al-Qaeda. That was the whole reason that the country was invaded in the first place. And I think that popular support is gradually slipping. Every single year that the forces are there, as the numbers increase, I think support from the local people drops and drops and drops. But the support for the Taliban also drops and drops and drops. The way that they're going to get the opportunity, as you pointed out, I think from your experience, to be able to do this is when criminality, when the general situation of law and order collapses to the point that the Taliban offer an alternative. The reason they came to power when they did in the 90s was because they brought law and order, they brought justice, and they brought security to the south. That's what people wanted, and that's what people talk about now that they don't get from the international forces, from the government of Afghanistan. And I think that unless that's sorted out, it's going to allow the space for the Taliban, the insurgency, and the criminal gangs and all the rest of it to be able to come into this situation and to prevent the international forces from winning, i.e. for them to leave before that job is done.
John, a question to you. This debate is pretty timely at the moment, because what we're hearing in this country is pretty negative publicity about what's going on in Afghanistan. Sunday we had the news that 100 British soldiers have now died there since 2001. You've spent a lot of time embedded with both British and US forces. What's morale like there? Do the forces out there feel that the Taliban are now gaining the upper hand?
I think it's important to point out I've spent most of the, well, a lot of time with the Americans over the last couple of years, and they're operating in different places. One of my big frustrations here is that in the UK, everybody talks about Afghanistan, but they're talking about Helmand because that's what's being reported. And I understand why, but I think it's a mistake because there are different fights. Just like the term Taliban encompasses a lot of other people who are not Taliban. The fight that's happening in different areas in Afghanistan are for different reasons, and so they have different results. And I've been just spent 7 weeks in Paktika and Khost on the Pakistan border, and the Americans there are not just fighting Taliban. They're fighting Uzbeks, they're fighting Chechens, they're fighting Arabs. There are people coming across from Waziristan. We all know about the deal that was done recently in Waziristan and the new Pakistan government. And they've taken the pressure off Waziristan. They've allowed free movement of fighters. And what you have now is a situation where young Islamic fundamentalists who feel like having a pop at a Westerner can travel to Waziristan, cross the border and get in a fight. And it's very easy for them to do. And so the fight there that the Americans are facing is completely different to what's going on down in Helmand and Kandahar, where the British and Canadian and the US Marines have just arrived. I think the Americans' morale is pretty high in the east because, I mean, they're not winning either. It's a stalemate. I would agree with Alastair. I think it's a stalemate. I think that the Taliban and other associated fighters don't have the power to achieve victory in Afghanistan, but at the same time, the coalition are not decisively ending the fight. The problem here is that a stalemate plays into the hands of the insurgents. I talked to you earlier about this concept of destroying the will at home to fight, this concept of asymmetric warfare. I'm not going to go into horrible definitions, but the basic idea in modern guerrilla warfare is not to defeat your enemy on the battlefield, it's to destroy the will at home to support the war, whether it's through votes, whether it's through economics. But if you convince enough people in the home country, say, why are our soldiers there? What are we doing? My God, we've just had 100 British soldiers killed. We should get out of there. That's how the insurgents are going to win. And by having a stalemate, it doesn't stay a stalemate because they win from that. I think in the East at the moment, the Americans feel that they are able to deal with the enemy they face. But this is their 7th year out there. I've spoken to guys who are on their 3rd deployment to Afghanistan. They've done 2 12-month tours, and now they're on a 15-month tour. They can't sustain that.
So what you're saying is that it's more about the Taliban publicity machine rather than the gains they're making. We'll be hopefully getting the perspective of that Taliban publicity machine from Mullah Abdul Salam Zaif, who will hopefully be joining us on the phone from Kabul a little bit later on. But I just want to turn to James briefly. And James, in your book, A Million Bullets, you talk about what Britain in particular is achieving, whether it has achieved anything in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
From your point of view, in your experience, can you just talk about what you think is being achieved, if anything?
You hear these reports of progress from the front line, from British soldiers. They come in spikes. And we've just had one. We had Brigadier Carlton Smith was just saying we've decapitated the Taliban the other day, decapitated the leadership, and solid achievements are being made and so on. They happen every 6 months because the British tours go in 6-month tours. And so what happens is the soldiers, about this stage in the tour, they start having to justify what they're doing to higher ups back at home. It's just the way the system works. There are, I think, things being achieved locally, micro victories, if you like. Maybe you could argue, and they do, the British, that for example, Musa Kala is now a market again, and the opium dealers have been driven out, and I think the Americans are doing the same thing in Khost. But these micro victories do not amount to an overall regional strategic victory, and that is the problem. It's no good talking about decapitating the leadership of the Taliban when the body and the neck of this monster are not even in Afghanistan, they're in Pakistan, as everybody knows. And it's a hydra. If you cut off the head of a hydra, it gets replaced. And that is what's happening. We're getting more sort of Taliban leaders coming in. They're younger. They're actually more they're more extreme in their views. It's not a zero-sum game. You cannot decapitate this monster particularly. I think that are the Taliban winning? Yes, they are in some places, I have to say, but the Taliban is actually quite a mess now as a movement. I went to see the Taliban last year. I did so in Wardak province, which is about 30 miles southwest of Kabul, only 30 miles from the capital. And in Wardak, they were essentially the night government. They were running that province from the Chak Valley. They ran it at night. The moment the sun went down, the Taliban were in charge. During the day, it was kind of a government, they just about had control of it. But really, as far as I could see, when there were local disputes or legal disputes, the local people were going to the Taliban to get redress for their problems. They would tend to go to the Taliban before going to the local police or the local judiciary because they'd get satisfaction more quickly. That was beginning of last year. Now, the same place, a contact of mine went back there beginning of this year, and the government had given up. Chak Valley is now completely Taliban, day and night, and to get into Chak Valley, he went by car. His driver stopped at the entrance to the valley, got a mobile phone out of the glove box, went ch-ch-ch like that, drove forward 50 yards, stopped again, ch-ch-ch, and on he went. And my friend said, "What was all that about?" And he said, "Well, that was just the bombs in the road. We control this valley now through bombs strewn across the road. It's like security gates at Notting Hill. That's the way they're operating. And nobody can go there. That's completely their territory. And we're not even beginning to fight them there. And it's 30 miles from Kabul." So I agree completely with the remark about, when Afghanistan gets reported here, it's actually Helmand. There is this sort of strange disease among the British. It's called Helmand centricity. And it completely skews the debate because the debate is much wider. Afghanistan is a huge country. We're not even hearing about Wardak and the stuff that's going on up in the north or Mazar or Herat indeed. And there are things going on everywhere. And of course over the border. So,
Great.
Have I answered the question? Probably not.
Well, let's go to James up the Rhine, NATO's spokesperson. James just mentioned there Wardak. Wardak's not the only example of Taliban gains in the country. We've got a situation within NATO where there's serious issues of division between supposed partners in the ISAF-led forces. You've got a NATO commander, General McNeil, who described on leaving his position an under-resourced force in Afghanistan. What's your assessment of how the mission is going?
Well, obviously mixed, and as the spokesman still being paid, you would expect me to say that, but I think we see, frankly, some of the same challenges that everyone mentioned here, and that is every country in NATO, because of the way in which they designed this operation, looks at Afghanistan through a straw. For the Canadians, it's Kandahar. The journalists fly straight to Kandahar. The aid goes straight to Kandahar. And when I go to Canada, when I go to the UK, when I go to the Netherlands, you get the same question every time. Why are we there alone? And when I say, actually, there's 17 countries in the south. There's 17,000 soldiers in the south. They're surprised, to say the least. And this has given not only the impression, but I think to a certain extent the reality of tension over solidarity, which is optical rather than real in some cases and real in other cases. I think big picture for us from NATO is similar to what I heard, but with a slightly different take. Yes, for all the reasons that I think we heard, the idea of a total eradication of every Taliban or whatever they are in Afghanistan is an impossibility, and safe havens across the border is a clearer reason why it will never be possible to do that. But big picture is this. Is the Taliban winning in terms of spreading geographically? According to our statistics, and you've heard this before, 2006, 70% of the incidents were in 10% of the provinces. 2007, 70% of the incidents in 10% of the provinces. 2008, so far, 70% of the incidents in 10% of the provinces. So is it spreading the way we see it? No. Second question, is popular support falling in NATO countries? It's generally stabilized. And the big picture is this. There are 40 countries in this coalition. There were fewer countries before, now there's more. We started with 6,000 forces, we're now up to 53,000, and that number is set to climb
Yes, but
again.
everybody knows that you need far, far more.
Well, I'm not sure that's true. If you ask the Afghans, the Afghan government, they don't want far, far more. And when Dan McNeil said we need 400,000, there was an instantaneous reaction across the Afghan government. No, we don't want that.
Well, the junkie doesn't want to get off heroin either, but he needs to, and the reality is that they need more soldiers.
They do need more soldiers, that's absolutely right, but they need their own soldiers, and they are producing 1 Afghan battalion every 2 weeks. These are being deployed. 100% of the operations in the east, 100%, have Afghans in them. 90% in the south, 60% in the west. And increasingly they're taking the lead, and let me give you the final example. In Kabul, in August, they will take the lead of their operations. So, to finish, I always hear this cliche, oh, they have the watches, but we have the time, say the Taliban. They can outlast us. Yes, they can probably outlast us, but they can't outlast the Afghan National Army, the Afghan police, and and I hate to use this word exit strategy, but the future, the transition is, you train and equip the Afghans to fight their own fight. We are investing hundreds of millions in doing this. We are seeing it work, and that's the way it's going to go. In the end, the Afghans will fight their own fight.
And I don't know if you guys want to come in here. The problem here is that military intervention will never work unless similar or even more amount of money is invested in infrastructure and reconstruction. Now you are investing millions of dollars worth of money into weapons, machinery, people on the ground. But the US, for example, is investing a fraction of that in terms of reconstruction and civil issues, which the Afghans say they desperately need. Isn't that the crux of the problem here?
Well, I'm not sure it's the crux, but let me just point out that tomorrow in Paris there'll be a major pledging conference. You can expect $15 billion plus, but I think my colleagues here could probably testify to the fact there's a lot of money. It's a matter of A, coordination, B, capacity. I mean, everybody here who knows development knows there is a serious capacity issue in the Afghan government, which is, by the way, exacerbated by a corruption problem, which means that governments are unwilling to put their money through the government. They do it directly. So more investment in reconstruction and development, absolutely. But the foundation of this has to be improvement in governance, and I can guarantee that the Afghan government will hear that tomorrow. We're doing our part, you're absolutely right, and we're going to give the money. But governance has to improve for this to work on the reconstruction and development side.
And that's the crux, is about governance and corruption, isn't it? Because without, it doesn't matter how good the new Afghan National Army is or the police, if the government that they are supporting is still corrupt or even perceived to be corrupt, then they don't have the consent of the people. And you cannot have a military-only solution to this. And that was never part of the plan in the first place. There was always this thing called the comprehensive approach, where the military, our military, would go hand in hand with the Foreign Office and DFID and everyone else, and it just didn't happen for whatever local reasons in Helmand in 2006. But it continues to be the problem. I mean, development is a part of it, but the real crux of it is that ordinary Afghans do not trust their own government. And I have to say, I can't blame them. I mean, look who's in it. And it's just completely, I mean, that is...
I think it's also important to bear in mind that reconstruction doesn't happen in a bubble, and you have to have security for a reconstruction to be effective. I was at a school a few weeks ago, it's blown up 3 times, but it's been built 4 times, so it's there again. But there's no security. It's a small village. There are no Afghan police. And the base is several miles away, and it's only a matter of time until it gets blown up again. And the Americans who've paid for it know that. The villagers who are supposed to send the kids there know that. So you have to have. I know it's a vicious circle, but you have to have security for this development to be effective. And in order to have that security, you either have more international soldiers or you get the ANA and the ANP up and running. The ANA are not ready to take over anytime soon. I've been on operations many times with them, and the fact is the Americans, like the British, like the Canadians, are pushing this concept of an Afghan face. Every mission must have an Afghan face. The Americans take clothes out of the back of a vehicle, they hand them to the Afghan soldiers and then hand them out to the people. I've seen operations where, and it's announced afterwards, this was an Afghan-led mission. It wasn't, because an American commander sat there and said, turn your map this way, and this is where you need to move your guys.
But then again, look at, the Kabul is what's being taken over in August, and that's fair enough. I think the NDS, the intelligence services, are doing a fantastic job. They've stopped a huge number of suicide bombers from going into Kabul. They've prevented an awful lot of things from happening there. They're strong, and I think one thing that I think we mustn't do is underestimate the Afghan. Neither security forces, nor the Afghan government, nor the Afghans as a whole. It's easy for the international community to say, oh, no, they don't know how to do it, they're doing it wrong. But no, it's far more sophisticated than that. They're much, much better at that. And when we talk about corruption, when we're talking about amounts of money, it would be very easy, without getting too much into the development issue, although it's Paris tomorrow, so there's a reason to. How much money is being wasted from the international community? What percentage of money doesn't leave the United States that's being provided by the USAID? What goes straight back into those companies again? And I'll ask you a question on this. Why on earth are the Afghan army being rearmed with M16 rifles? Why on earth, of one of the countries with the most guns in the world, that work underwater in sand anywhere, being given great weapons that, if they cleaned them, would make great sniper rifles for the Taliban when they get sold? Why the hell are they being given those guns? Because they want them. That's a huge waste of money, and that feeds into the government corruption. If the international community are doing it, then why the hell can't we do it? And we'll take our cut from it. Money's being thrown around. It's not being monitored properly, it's not being spent properly, and that is encouraging the Afghan corruption. It's encouraging the problem.
Well, I think one important step is tomorrow, and that's the Afghan National Development Strategy. And it's not an abstract thing. There has never been a strategy. This is an Afghan-led process, and it may not be the easiest document to read. I think there's 800 pages in it, but there's a little executive summary, which I have read.
Which doesn't relate, actually, to the actual document. Well, because I've read both of them.
But it's there, and even on the development side, we're going to start seeing some changes. There's a very, very impressive man by the name of Popal who does local development. And he's been given a lot of authority by President Karzai. And he was talking to us.
Cousin.
Okay. And
Karzai's cousin.
And he's got the right idea. He went and looked at the provincial reconstruction teams. They said, look, what's happening is you're Canadian. I'll speak as a Canadian for a moment. Your Canadian PRTs going in. You've got experts from Ottawa who look at the long-term needs and invest. But the people don't see necessarily their needs being met, and they don't see their government delivering their assistance. So it's working a new way of doing it, which is local requirements are sent to the central government. Central government says this, this, and this, and then the PRT delivers, because they have the capacity and they're probably not corrupt. Because I might want to go back one day to Ottawa, so I'll say the seat is not corrupt, but I think they're not corrupt.
And we've talked a lot about...
So it's changing too.
And we've talked a lot about corruption within the Afghan government, but one of the key problems as well is trust of the NATO-led forces in Afghanistan. Civilian deaths do not help when it comes to that trust. Can you just talk about what NATO is doing to try to stop the huge number of civilian deaths that we're seeing, increasing number over the last few years?
Well, let me say first, it's not huge and it's not increasing, and I'll come to that. Second, before I start into the measures, we have seen 6 major polls in Afghanistan over the last 4 years, the time that I've been in this job, and not done by us, Asia Foundation, legitimate exterior organizations that consistently say you have about 80% support for international forces in Afghanistan. That has not changed a bit, which, by the way, does not go to success of the Taliban, I might add. And I have all of these. If anybody wants them, just call my office. But we had more civilian casualties last year than we could have hoped for or expected. A lot of that was wrapped up in, and I know the danger of saying this in a group like this, face value, taking at face value what the Taliban was saying. And we pushed back very hard with journalists to say, check it, it's not true, or give us time to check. Short version is Dan McNeil put in place a series of measures, Alastair will know this very well, to make sure the soldiers checked again, to make sure they were more restrained. This year, I'll give you the number, according to our math, NATO ISAF forces are responsible for about 16 civilian casualties, and the Taliban is responsible for 300. So let's put this in proportion. It's nice to talk about NATO, and we're willing to have this discussion.
Alastair, do you want to respond to that?
Let's put the blame or the proportion up front.
I think there has been a reduction in the number of civilian casualties, perhaps because of the nature, the way things have changed. I will slip a little bit into the Helmanditis on this one, because the nature of fighting there was quite specific, and you can talk about the different areas. There was a proper stand-up and fight. That has changed now. It is roadside bombs that are killing most of the British soldiers. That's the biggest danger. You're not getting that kind of fighting. Therefore, you're not getting the air support. Therefore, you're not getting the bombs being dropped. Therefore, the civilians aren't being killed in the numbers that they were. But I've got to ask you the question, well, what kind of a signal does it send when the US Marines, who were, the fingers were pointed out, the evidence was provided to their panel that recently reported, only 2 weeks ago, on the incident in Nangarhar, where they opened fire and killed 19 civilians, injured many more, over a 10-kilometre stretch of road after a suicide bomb attack, which they described as a complex ambush. Despite what the UN said, despite what the Afghan Independent Human Rights Commission said, they got off scot-free, they acted appropriately. What kind of message does that send to the Afghans, who the families, who every single one of those people who've died, you've now got an entire family that's against you, and probably their extended family, which is an awful lot of people. And when it comes to winning people over, obviously we see the impact that has.
Well,
you can't speak for them, I know.
You know, I can't and wouldn't speak to U.S. government issues. Those are U.S. government issues. But I certainly agree with you, it didn't go down well.
There's a central problem here, isn't it, which is the dependence on air power, which we've seen right from the start, which is a function of the fact that the armies that we're sending there are not big enough. I mean, when McNeil talks about we need 400,000 people, he's talking about boots on the ground. And orthodox counterinsurgency requires boots on the ground. If you're going to win people's hearts and minds, you cannot do it from the air. But we're in a bind, and the British don't have an army big enough for this, and it's 100,000 people with 40 helicopters. You cannot begin to kind of do a hearts and minds operation in the way that it should be done. And the way it was done, actually, in Malaya, which was the last time the Brits have ever done a successful counterinsurgency thing, it was all about flooding the place with numbers and getting boots on the ground. And that's where it's a central thing right from the beginning. Doesn't matter how accurate the bombing is, or how few people are being killed from the air. I mean, goodness, still, one is too many. And
I think, John, you made a really interesting point earlier about the Taliban using tactics.
Absolutely, and I have to say, I
using
agree.
built-up areas to fight
I agree with what
from,
some of James is saying, and also Alastair would say that you're not Helmand-centric when you talk about the change in tactics. In the East, the same thing has happened, and the Americans have comment on it that the fighters they're facing are not prepared to go toe-to-toe with them anymore. They've changed their tactics and they're setting these roadside bombs. And last year I filmed and photographed civilians who were brought into a casualty support hospital, Afghans who had been blown up by a roadside bomb that was planted by Taliban insurgents, ACM, whatever you want to call them today. But yeah, the other point is that I don't think people pay enough attention or understand just how aware of the media that the Taliban and insurgents are. They're very good at getting out their message. And in fact, Alastair will remember when we both managed to get into Helmand in early 2006, and that C-130 crashed outside Lashkar-Gah, and we couldn't get out to it. But before we'd even gone, I believe, the Taliban had called up BBC and Sky and everyone else and said we shot it down.
When the attack on Karzai's parade the day, we got a phone call from the Taliban about 2 minutes after it happened. Before we even left the door to go down there, having heard that there'd been something, they were on the phone immediately telling us exactly what they'd done.
But the point is, in Lashkar-Gah, they didn't shoot down that plane. But they seized on it immediately and said... They
did blow it up with a bomb they left at the end of the runway, though.
So misinformation and exaggeration is what you're talking about. Well, we can actually, I think, cross live now, possibly, to Abdul Salam Zaid. Just a brief introduction. He was the Taliban's ambassador in Islamabad, spent 4 years in Guantanamo, and hopefully he will be on the line right now. We have a translator with us, Kais. Thank you very much. He'll be translating from Pashtun to English.
Salam alaikum, Leithead. I was with the Zeus.
Just to make it clear, as Lise said there, I apologise if I didn't make it clear. He's not a Taliban spokesman. He's now on the Afghan side of things, living in Kabul, leading a pretty normal life, living in a very expensive villa. And is he okay to start? Can I ask my first question? Clearly, we know that he is no longer a Taliban spokesman, but maybe he could talk about Taliban tactics which are being used increasingly, the tactics of using suicide bombings. Many people would say that the tactics being used and suicide bombings are a sign of desperation now in the Taliban. What does he say to that?
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ذلك كلكم زيادة والخطايا على مالي. خلق كير جذبة ولي أكثر خلق شجاع غني جوانان دي. هغه دوه کارو چې زه شخصي راوي خپل هدف دی هدف د دې سره ډېر سپېڅلي چې دا چې هغه په لوبه نه څوک خبر نه شي خدای ته د واقعي علامه نه ده ځکه دا کار چې دی هغه د خلک چې دی هغه مشران چې دی هغه دا کار نه کوي دا کښته څه دا خلک کار کوي طالبان د دې چې دوی پکې
دا زه د دې ته ترجمه کوم بیا به نور هغه تاسو خبرې به دمه ورکوي ولکه he's saying that I don't think so. It's a sign of desperation because if we see all the suicide bomber, they are youngster and they do it on their own and they may have their own goals. And the leadership of Taliban, they never suggest such thing to do suicide bomb.
Okay.
Well,
I think, sorry, I think, Alastair, we would disagree with that, wouldn't we?
Just he's not finished.
Oh, right.
Yes.
He won't finish.
No, I think. Okay, no, sorry, I have to interrupt there. I think that's no. Can you tell him not to interrupt there? Can you tell him that we have to? Sorry. Can you tell him? We've got another question for him.
دا چې دا یو تر ودی چې هغه د کارانو مخې نیسي چې د کارانو مخې نیسي او په شواروزو باندې لاندې
یو علاقه زه دا خبرته وایم بله shall I translate this?
Yes, just translate it.
Okay, he's saying that the Taliban are getting stronger day by day and they are controlling areas and provinces and they are coming to the roads and attacking the caravans and this is not the sign of weak and desperation.
How many of these people are we talking about that are Afghans and how many are from Pakistan?
Suicide bomber.
Suicide bombers and the roadside bombers, are they all from Pakistan or are they Afghans?
د سوال داسنه کوي چې د څوک چې د ځانونه چوي سوره دو افغانان دي او سوره نور خارجيان دي یا پاکستانیان دي او نور د سرک په غاړه چې بمونه دي یا په کاروانو چې حمله کوي د سوره افغانان دي او سوره بهرني خلک دي
ما فکر په داخل کې چې افغانستان کې کومه حمله کې دا ټول د داخلي طالبان د افغانستان کا بمونه دي کارونه ودي چې راکټ استعمالي کټوندي استعمالي او که جنگ کې او کې څنګه نیولې دا ټول طالبان یا ما هغه چې پرېدل کې او دانه چې وي هغه تاسو چې پاکستانیان سره مافانه ودا دا جنگ خلک چې هغه تقریبا اکثر افغانان
he's saying that as far as I know and I think all those who are fighting and putting the roadside bombs and attacking the caravans, they are mostly Afghan fighters. And so about the suicide bomber, they are mixed, either Afghans or Pakistanis.
Okay. Basically, can you answer this question? The aim of the Taliban is to rid Afghanistan of foreign forces. What evidence is there that the Afghan people actually show any support at all towards the Taliban?
تاسو مسؤل کوي وایي چې د طالبانو اصلي هدف دا ده چې افغانستان د بهرني پوځونو پاکان دي او دا داسې کومه علامه یا هغه تاسو لیدلی چې د افغانستان خلک د طالبانو د دو هدف نه حمایت وکړه
نو چې وینو د طالبان هدف هم دا دی چې خارجان د ملک وشلي او ووځي او افغانستان خپلواکي ترلاسه کړي تر ډېره خو هدف هم دا دی یمه دا چې طالبان څونې پولیس مشرانه لري څونې خلک د دوی سره همکاري کوي دا معلومه خبره ده که خلکو سره همکاري نه کولی نو امنیتي دوی نشوه کنټرولولی دا د خلکو همکاري ده چې دوی افغانستان کې ځای لري او د ټولې دنیا د قوتونو د سوپر قوتونو په مقابل کې جنګېږي او هغوی فشار کوي یا هغوی کاروانو مخې نیسي نو دا د دې علامه ده چې خلک ورسره شته دا معنا نه چې ټول افغانستان ورسره شته خو د دوی د فکر خلک په افغانستان کې دي
He's saying that this is the only aim of Taliban to get rid of foreign forces and Afghanistan join their independent back and but of course Taliban have supporters and if the clear sign is that Taliban are getting stronger and they are getting stronger and they are controlling big and bigger areas day by day and I'm not saying that all Afghans are Taliban supporter, but there are a big number of people that they are supporting this cause and they are supporting Taliban, and they have. This is why Taliban have place in Afghanistan.
Okay, he's saying that the Taliban is spreading, but isn't it clear to everyone that Taliban's only spreading in Pashtun-dominated areas and has very, very little influence at all in the north of the country?
دا څه پوښتنه کوي چې دا صحیح دی تاسو خبره چې طالبان هغه لري خلک لري چې دینه حمایت وکړه خدا داسې وایي چې طالبان چې موږ کومه خبر یو تنه د په منطقو کې هغه د اکثریت یا ورځ ډیریږي چې د پښتنو منطقه ده آیا په مزار شریف کې یا په شمال کې په نور ځای کې نشته
که تاسو خبره رښتیا هم وي زه خو فکر کوم چې ټول افغانستان کې نفوذ لري په شمال کې هم لري په جنوب کې هم لري خو که تا خبره صادقه شي نو د افغانستان اکثریت هم پښتانه دي چې اکثریت چې ولري نو معنا دا ده چې ټول کې لري
He's saying you might be right, but I think the Taliban have supporters all over in Afghanistan, in the north, in the west, in the south, and if you are saying that they have supporters in the Pashtun areas of Afghanistan, and the Pashtuns are the majority of Afghan population, if they have supporter in the majority of Afghanistan, then it's the sign that they have a supporter all over the country.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. If you'd like to thank him very much for joining us on the line.
د تاسو ډیره مننه شکریه کوي او چې د شپه نا وخت هم دا تاسو د خوب وتلی ډیر تشکر خیر سي مولوي صاحب کاش تاسو غواړو دای مالشه السلام علیکم خیر سي السلام علیکم.
Just to make it clear to the audience, we did try to get a government spokesperson, but unfortunately we weren't able to do so. Can I just get any comments from the panel on what Mr. Zaif had to say there?
I'd like to comment if I could. I met him. I met Mullah Zaif last year. I had lunch with him about a year ago, and he's the most interesting thing about him in some ways is that he's got this book. He wrote a memoir about his time in Guantanamo. He was appallingly treated, and he is, justifiably, very angry indeed about his treatment. You couldn't really imagine a less likely terrorist. He's a very sort of, bespectacled, rather gentle, academic type of man. Very charming, actually. And in some ways might have been a very good interlocutor for the Americans. If they were trying to kind of do anything like dialogue with Taliban, he would have been the man. But they've completely blown it by, pulling him around by his beard in Guantanamo and all the rest of it. He wrote this memoir. I think I'm right in saying it is the best-selling Pashtun book of all time. It is something like, I can't remember what the sales are, 200,000 copies, and it's coming our way. It's being translated and will be available in English, I think, quite soon. It's taken rather too long to translate, but it's worth knowing all that. His position in Kabul is very strange. He lives kind of under house arrest. It's a rather weird thing. He has permanent guards on his gate who are Northern Alliance guards. It's not quite, in a very Afghan way, it's not quite explained what the guards are doing there, but he's being watched. And I think actually his connection to the Taliban is nothing like what it was in the old days, but he's been quite vocal recently. He's been sort of, it's interesting that he's talking to us now, and he's been in the press a bit. I don't quite know what's going on. The tenor of what he was saying there was really rather fighting talk, actually. It was more bellicose than it was last year.
Yeah. Any other comments from the panel about what he had to say? Okay, I think we're going to open up to the floor now for any questions that you may have.
I'm Nicholas Miller. I have been involved in development in Afghanistan over the years. And when you're talking about is the Taliban winning, you talked about their success in actually in certain areas providing an alternative judiciary. Is there any evidence that they are in areas of strong support, getting any taxes or providing any healthcare services or controlling education, doing any of the sort of basic services you would expect from a legitimate government?
Is that a question directed at anyone in particular?
Anyone who's prepared to answer it.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. There have been reports of them, certainly in terms of justice. In the south of the country, we're talking about the place where the Taliban came from. We're talking about the kinds of things that they're infamous for when they're in government, being things that are, to a certain extent, acceptable in that society. The people want, above all, as I said at the beginning, justice, and they want security. If justice means cutting heads off, then people in those areas, to a certain extent, will accept that as a form of justice, given that that is what they really want. I'll go out and say that, first of all. Secondly, no, I think they haven't provided the kind of government services. They know in Musa Qala they've now recently, I think, given a decree saying that they are happy for people to attend the school there. That's kind of okay then, if you want. So yeah, they will have that. They don't provide those kinds of services, of course they don't. But the kinds of areas we're talking about, the rural areas, they don't have those resources anyway. They don't have those clinics, and they don't necessarily see the benefit of them until they arrive, until they're given, and then people realise, that they don't have to, that every 3/3 of them don't have to die in childbirth. So no, I don't think they are.
Just a quick point on that. Before Mazar-i Sharif was taken back by NATO-led forces and the Afghans, an Al Jazeera cameraman went there and travelled there and filmed there and spoke to a number of people there, and what Afghans were telling Al Jazeera was that they were moving to Mazar-i Sharif because it provided them with security. They felt secure in Mazar-i Sharif and they felt secure for their families there. So perhaps that's one point that we can make, that the Taliban's making certain groups of people feel secure. Yes, they're dishing out their type of justice, but at the same time, they feel secure. That's why.
Secure enough to sell their drugs, anyway.
Well, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, let's again look at the big picture. In the last 7 years, and you've all heard this now, but access to healthcare up from 8% to 80%, access to education from 1 million to 6 million, including girls, infant mortality down dramatically. The economy's doubled, per capita income have tripled. None of this, I'm so sorry, is due to the Taliban. So let's not have any equivalency here. This is the Afghan government and the international community offering all of these services, polio injections, etc., which the Taliban not only are not providing, but they are actively blowing up the schools, burning down the schools, going after the teachers, going after the health workers, trying to block all of these things, because any support for the government goes against them.
But we're talking about the havens that they have control of.
Exactly. But I just don't want us to paint little idyllic Monet paintings about where they happen to have offer security.
Okay.
Let's be realistic.
Any other questions? Lady here. You just introduced yourself.
I'm Kate Clark. I'm a freelance journalist. Taliban were never any good at education, government, and health, even when they were in government. The NGOs did a lot of the work when they were more interested in fighting, and always have been. So that was just one little comment. I want to ask the panel about reconciliation. What are you doing, NATO? Why are you fighting? Why aren't you reconciling? The Afghan government, Alastair, why aren't they doing it properly? They've been talking about it for years, but as we see with Zaif, who's in house arrest, and others haven't been particularly well treated or brought over.
My answer is easy. We have a mandate from the UN. UN mandate is to create a safe and secure environment. It's not to get involved in the politics of the country. If President Karzai or the elected government wants to engage in reconciliation, that's their decision and we'll support them. But we do not.
Counterinsurgency, surely politics is the basis of counterinsurgency.
Indeed, but it's not our politics. We have a specific mandate from the UN. There's lots of things NATO could do, NATO commanders could do, but they don't do them. That's not in our box. That box is an Afghan box, and I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the efforts for reconciliation, everyone appears now to be saying it's the way forward. They seem to think that with the firepower, with the international forces being perhaps the biggest warlord on the block, they've got some leverage to be able to, get them, the position of strength to be able to get them to the table to talk on equal footing. I think the government of Afghanistan has made that its policy for some time, but has done nothing. I remember going to interview the head of the Reconciliation Commission, the son of Professor Mujdidi, and asking him if he could name anyone that actually got to change sides. And he said, "We've got a list. Yeah, can you name any?" No, we've got a list. Nobody of any strength has been taken through that process. But you look at the American and the British efforts. The British have certainly been at the forefront of trying to push this in Helmand. The initial deal in Musa Qala, which saw the British forces, the troops pull out. You probably will know the story. I won't go through the whole thing; it's complicated. But basically, they went out, and that was a deal which then collapsed later on. But at least was an attempt towards this. The current, Mullah Salam in Musa Qala at the moment with his curly-toed shoes. Another one who's a great, experiment in trying to get this reconciliation. The Americans have come on side with that now. For a long time they were very much opposed to it. They seem to have changed their policy and now feel that reconciliation is a way. Unfortunately, they're all going in pretty much different directions. They're all approaching different people. The Afghan government suspicious of the British because they remember the Great Game and think that if political officers or people like Michael Semple are talking to the Taliban, then they're doing it for their own reasons, not for the greater good of the government. Therefore, they're trying to stab the government in the back, so they shouldn't be trusted, so they shouldn't do it. It's all very confusing, and it's not in the right direction. And it's built around the whole issue of trust, which is very difficult when you've got an international community and the Afghan government working in the way they are at the moment.
My assumption is that there is more dialogue going on than we know about in a sort of secret squirrel kind of way, because historically no insurgency has ever been conquered without negotiation in the end, and everyone knows that. So I would assume that it is going on backstage in all sorts of ways, and the Michael Semple thing was backstage suddenly coming frontal stage, but I mean I'm sure it's not the only conversation that's going on, and I'm all for it, and I think the sooner we get on with it the better, and I think dialogue is going to resolve a lot of the misunderstandings between the two sides.
Okay, can we just...
I hope so, yeah.
Okay,
I think there is.
Move on now to
in London, I think there
questions. Does that gentleman in the back there?
Fat red-headed balding kid.
I was about to say, a very handsome gentleman in the back.
Nothing wrong with balding.
Nothing. Nothing wrong.
What the hell is the strategy? Why are we there? This conflict in Afghanistan has lasted longer than the Second World War. This is what really upset people when hearing 100 British deaths. It wasn't 100 British deaths. In an open-ended conflict, which the British, yes, I am a British journalist, I don't wear red, white and blue on my underpants. But
why not?
Why are we there? As the gentleman from NATO will know, a NATO mission statement is average 40 words. Why are we there? What is expected to be the outcome? What is the definition of Taliban, which an exam question you failed at so far this evening? And the bullshit that we heard from there, that the Tajiks, the northern people would embrace Taliban, I doubt it. Taliban and Talibanism is expanding into Punjab, which is very, very dangerous indeed. And
so the question is, why are we there? Why are we there,
Give it to me
James?
in 40 words each. Thank you.
I'm not sure I can count while I talk.
I'll do that.
Current NATO mission statement.
Yeah, well, the short version is this. We're there to help Afghanistan no longer be a threat to itself, to its region, and to the international community. It was not just the home of the Taliban in 2001, and I think you hit the nail on the head. There were at least a dozen different terrorist groups training in Afghanistan. This was Grand Central Station for Afghanistan, from China, from the Arab Peninsula, of course from Pakistan. And they were coming there and leaving better trained, more motivated, and going back out to wherever they launch a track. So from our point of view, we have a clear self-interest. This is 20/20 hindsight. If we leave, Al-Qaeda's right across the border, they'll be back, and everybody else will be back. And to say, well, it won't happen this time, is frankly to suspend disbelief in the most profound way. Second, if you believe, and everybody here believes, in fundamental human rights, yes, you can say, well, you're not doing it everywhere. Well, here you have a case clear as day that if you support the principles of the United Nations Charter, UN mandates agreed unanimously by the Security Council, if you want to protect human rights, you want to protect women's rights, you got to do this. So if you want, that's more than 40 words, but I think it's as clear as day.
Just can I just bring John D here?
Yeah, it's again, because I've spent a lot of time with the Americans rather than the British, there's a different view, and I ask soldiers this all the time, why are you here, what are you doing here? The young soldiers are up to sergeant, they're absolutely clear, they're there to stop another 9/11. Now, people can sneer it, people can disagree with it, but that's what they believe, that's what they're doing there. I spoke to an American colonel 2 years ago. After some of his guys had just been killed, and a lot of his other soldiers were very upset. And I asked him, what are you doing here, what are you achieving here? And he said, we can't fix the problem. The Afghans have to fix the problem for themselves. All we can do is act like a monitor in the playground. We have to keep the bully away from the other kids until they grow up. And that was his way of explaining it. So that's the American view. I've heard similar things, and I think that's how the Americans see it, which is very different to the British view.
And James, you can give the British view.
Well, I think the Brits are there. The reason that they're is Tony Blair. I think he got overexcited about Sierra Leone and how successful it was, and he thought, this is the next one. I really do. I think it's war number 5 for him. I think he piled in there. But I really want to pick up on the line that you say, if we're not there, then Al-Qaeda are going to come back. That is something you hear over and over again. How do you know? What makes you so sure that Al-Qaeda would come back if we vacated? Couldn't we stop? Aren't there other ways of making sure that Al-Qaeda can come back other than a foreign army occupation? Because all the Afghans I say don't like Al-Qaeda. And they kind of go, Taliban say, you destroyed our government for one man. And they kind of have a point. I'm like,
okay, we'll forget Al-Qaeda. And just great to say, let troops out now. But what the hell's going to be left behind if the troops go out now? Realistically speaking, the troops can't pull out now, because if they do, it will collapse into civil war.
I agree with that.
All the work that's been done up to now will be absolutely pointless, and who knows what the hell will be left. I'm perhaps being a little too optimistic. No, as a journalist. But hey, let's stick with it for a bit. As I say, winning is not losing long enough to try and leave something behind that's going to kind of work. If you pull the troops out now, you're going to have civil war straight away. Pull them out in 5 years' time, maybe it won't be so bad.
Quick question. Quick question to James. James, are the Canadians going to leave the South?
Well, their plan is to leave the South in 2011. That's a cross-parliamentary decision. Does it mean they'll leave Afghanistan? I don't know. They're already adapting their mission, and I think everybody in Afghanistan is looking to adapt in the same way, and that is maybe not less military for now, but more and more reconstruction and development, more investment in this. Let's move towards transition.
How is that going to happen when you've got the Canadians leaving? You're probably going to have the Dutch leaving. How is that going to happen?
Not leaving. Dutch are not leaving.
Well,
they've taken a decision to leave in 2010, at least from the area that they're in.
Taking over command, they're prepared to stay with command. You're not reading the Dutch press.
I actually do read the Dutch press. I work for a Dutchman.
Well, we've got a NATO spokesman here saying that they probably are going to leave. So.
Well, that's the decision they've taken, and so we'll see what happens later. But you're absolutely right. There have been 2 parliamentary decisions for withdrawals, but that doesn't mean that they'll leave Afghanistan. It doesn't mean that the other 15 countries that are in the South are planning to leave. It doesn't mean that the U.S., as they draw down in Iraq, may well not increase in the South and in the East. I'd say there's a pretty much bipartisan feeling in the U.S. that they need to do more in Afghanistan.
But you have to decide why, in the words of Sun Tzu and every strategic thinker through, this is still one sentence, why Afghanistan is strategic ground, which demands 1/10 of the British Army, about 20% of the American military effort, bits and pieces of the Canadians, and thank you for the NATO spokesman. I now will write in my newspaper that the Dutch and the Canadians are pulling out, and they've been doing the fighting. And apart from the Danes, the Estonians, there's not much else to do the fighting in the southwest. Why should such disproportionate amounts of blood and treasure be expended there? It's very difficult. Say why this is the strategic context. Iraq's all over. It's all over by this time next year. So the big fight's going to be in Afghanistan.
Can we move on to any other questions, please? Lise Doucet.
Lise Doucet from the BBC. I have a question. First of all, a question for James. You mentioned in passing the sanctuary for the Taliban and Al-Qaeda allies and others in Pakistan. And it seems that up until now, NATO has left it up to individual governments. They don't see their strategy. They say we're an alliance. We're too unwieldy. We can't deal with Pakistan. But when you have military commanders in the South and the East using this unfortunate expression that fighting the Taliban is like mowing a lawn, that doesn't, they just keep coming back at you. Is that really sustainable in the long run? Because it's interesting that James mentioned the latest British commander in Helmand saying, well, we've got the Taliban on the run. That was in the Telegraph, but that same day the New York Times had a piece of Baitul Masood and how he's been strengthened in the past few years and basically has the run of the place with an inexhaustible supply, it seems, of people who want to be suicide bombings. The 2 things can't be true. And very briefly to John, to Alastair and James, you've been going back and forth to the South and the East. the kind of statistics we heard from James and we hear from the Afghan government, that there is a growing capacity and presence of the Afghan government. What have you seen where you have gone? Have you seen more presence of on the district level, on the village, on the town level? Because sadly, the history of many of the battles has been that NATO forces prevail, withdraw, and the Taliban come back.
Yeah.
Thank you.
James, do you want to?
On Pakistan,
Yeah.
and you'll understand that I have to be a little bit careful. But I'll be frank about this. We have seen April 2008 versus April 2007, a 53% increase in the number of offensive actions by opponents in the south. That number in April was equal to August. April 2008 was equal to August 2007, the highest point we had seen until then, and May was higher. So there is real concern in NATO about these deals and the effect that it is having in let's say, allowing for greater cross-border support for the insurgency inside of Afghanistan. I don't think that's news, and it's across the press every day. The US has raised the alarm, but they're not alone, and we have done it in NATO for the first time. The Secretary General, my boss, who will, I'm quite sure, pay attention to what I'm saying here, always says Pakistan has to be part of the solution. It can't just be seen as part of the problem.
So why isn't it?
Well, it is. It has. Pakistan is facing the same problem that Afghanistan is facing. I mean, you can talk about strategic depth or blowback or whatever you want, but right now the extremism problem in Pakistan poses a threat to Pakistan, as much as the extremism problem in Afghanistan poses a threat to Afghanistan. So if there's going to be a solution, it has to be a regional solution, not just Pakistan, but very much Pakistan.
John D, you were on the Afghan-Pakistani border for weeks, I understand. You just came back last week.
Yeah.
What are your observations?
Well, first of all, the fighting is extremely intense along the Mazar-i-Sharif border, and that is because of this deal that's been done with by Taliban Masood. And absolutely, him and his colleagues have free run of the border, and it's obviously, I'm talking about attacks every day, rocket attacks, mortar attacks, direct fire attacks. They're getting close enough to hit people with machine guns. A lot of the time they're shooting rockets from the other side of the Pakistan border. Again and again, I heard the order come over the radio, do not fire into Pakistan. You can shoot to the border, you can shoot smoke to obfuscate, but you cannot shoot into Pakistan. And I don't see how that's sustainable. On the other question about government, I went to this combat outpost that the Americans had just built. 60 days, they built it in the mountains in coast on the border, and the idea was to stop the Taliban or insurgent incursion. As part of the counterinsurgency plan, separate the populace from the insurgents, but also bring local governance to the people and connect them to the government. They couldn't get the appointed government official to go to this place called Spira because he said it was too dangerous. So his assistant was eventually, he arrived for whatever reason, and the commander, the American commander there, really had to battle to keep him there for a few days. And in the end, I witnessed an argument where this official wanted to leave, but he wanted to be taken out by helicopter because he said the road was too dangerous, he didn't dare drive out. And the commander said, well, you're not getting a helicopter, I don't get a helicopter, you're going to have to drive. And it was absolutely clear that once this guy left, he wasn't coming back. So they're building a district centre. They've told the people, they made all these promises saying, the government is here now, you can all get your tashkirs, your government ID cards, you're going to be part of the new Afghanistan. That guy's not coming back, and his boss hasn't even come once.
So what's the problem? Is it corruption? Is it lack of funding?
Security. And this is what I talked about. This reconstruction cannot happen in a bubble. And while he feels afraid to go there, there's not going to be any development. And so I come back, and I know it's very unpopular, but they do need more troops, whether it's international troops or they need to get the ANA and the ANP up to speed. And coming back to something I said earlier, I wasn't suggesting that the ANA are useless, and it annoys me when people slag them off and say, oh, they're a bloody disaster. There's some great soldiers in the ANA. I do think that the way they're trained and provision needs to be looked at, because taking Afghan commanders away and sending them off to the US to train with special forces who have night vision goggles and predators in the sky with Hellfire missiles is ridiculous when they get sent back to Afghanistan and they have none of those options open to them.
I think on the issue of local governance, it's such an important part, is laid out in the counterinsurgency strategy. But at the end of the day, it's the person who is supported by the international community to do that job or by the government isn't necessarily the right person for the job. The right person for the job is probably the person who's from that area, who is the feudal lord, if you like, of that area, the tribe that's least unacceptable to anyone. In the way, I'll go back to Mr. Khalid because I think the Mullah Salam is a really interesting one. We'll see whether it works or not, it might not. But hey, here's a guy who's not from this tribe that fought this tribe, but he's from the one in the middle. And so these lot are like, well, okay, kind of, I suppose. It's a bit like Karzai, a bit like what he was when he came into power. He wasn't the strong tribal back, it was the least unacceptable, the least offensive to everyone else. And so you need to get these kind of tribal arrangements in place. It needs to have the space for that to mould, and that will take a long time to do. And by imposing people left, right and centre who don't necessarily work, it isn't the long-term solution. It's a matter of growing that up. And I guess it does come back to reconciliation. It gets back to what's going to work in that area. You know, I feel that the best we can hope for is not Surrey or whatever, as people often say, you know, a well-operating democracy, it's all wonderful, and well, no. You're going to have a group of feudal warlords who kind of run bits of the country and have a loose allegiance with the government, probably based around cash. And if that kind of works, then we'll leave.
Sorry, it's not exactly as it was before.
No, I don't think it was. I think that the difference that you'd get from...
Can you just introduce yourself? Sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm interested in the concept of that. I'm also interested in the idea of Afghanistan becoming sort of hub for jihad, which is a certain suggestion we're getting from the panel. There have been a lot of stories recently in Washington and other parts of the world about Al-Qaeda actually factionalizing, if you like, and people suggesting that Al-Qaeda is not on the run, but that the people within Al-Qaeda are fighting against each other. So the notion that Al-Qaeda is suddenly going to be there to take over, I'd love to have an opinion of whether that is the case in Afghanistan or not. I mean, there are quite serious people who are suggesting that there are real problems with Al-Qaeda.
Yeah, I mean, the Al-Qaeda thing to a certain extent is, I mean, there's the... Yeah, I mean, you've got the Taliban. I think we talk about the definition of Taliban, of course, and I think that that there is an influence, there is a kind of marriage of convenience between parts of the Taliban and parts of Al-Qaeda, but I don't necessarily think that it's going to be the haven for Al-Qaeda if things were to withdraw. But I think
James, you think
the space that would be...
Well, what I don't want to do is 6 years or 7 years after it was, as I say, the free run for not just Al-Qaeda, but 11 or 12 other terrorist kind of groupings, Uyghurs, Arabs, etc., that we would somehow come to the conclusion that, well, it won't happen again, even though they're kind of just across the border. And if they were given a safe haven, one of the reasons they're under pressure is precisely because they don't have a safe haven in Afghanistan. That's part of the reason. They're under pressure. We take that pressure away, they flow into it.
The suggestion is that the longer you stay, you create a magnet in Afghanistan to coalesce Al-Qaeda again. I mean, I think that's the point, that actually they're now splitting up. I mean, that's a much more interesting idea. Perhaps.
Well, if they're splitting up because we're in Afghanistan, that leads me to think we should stay.
Okay, should we move on now to any other questions? Sandra?
Hi, my name is Sandra Kaduri. I'm a communications advisor in Kabul at the moment. My question is, I mean, obviously the jury's still out about Afghanistan, but do you think the current situation and the sort of the negative image that everyone gets about what's happening there is going to put off or deter people from supporting future interventions, whether that would be US, UK, NATO interventions? I mean, how would it be if now we were encouraged to take part in another intervention? Would there be the public support for that?
It depends if you can find any national interest to you know, what's behind it, and that's what it's about. I mean, either you're a moralist or you take us a realpolitik line on this stuff, and you know, the realpolitik line is about preventing Al-Qaeda from coming back in there. But I mean, we aren't agreed about whether Al-Qaeda really would come back in there. I mean, each intervention is obviously different, but I think that the time for kind of that sort of pure ethical foreign policy has probably passed for the Brits. I just think it's been a nice experiment which has kind of now died. I mean, I can't see public support for, you know, another administration having 5 wars in 10 years. I really can't.
Any other questions? Go to Charlie Mayo there. Just introduce yourself, Charlie.
Hi. Yeah, Yeah, hi, my name is Charlie Mann. I'm a major in the Army, and I was the Chief of Media Operations in Helmand from March to sort of middle of September last year. Yeah. That's when I had some interesting times. Just one one very short comment in relation to civilian casualties, which is a very emotive subject. We took a lot of effort to try and make sure that we didn't kill people. And we're human at the end of the day, and we've all got families. And just give you an example of the difficulty. In about 3 weeks' time, the 30th of June, there was a very serious incident. We had reports of between 30 and 150 civilians being killed. Okay. The end result, after 3 days of investigation by the Afghans and us, was a shura of the local government in Gereshk, head of the army, head of the police, all the local tribal elders. They came to the conclusion that 46 people had died, but they don't really know. And to this day, no one really knows. The only time we ever knew definite numbers was when you had a small number of people, a small family, whatever, who'd been injured. And the problem is that unfortunately, and it's not people on the panel, but it's a lot of other media, will jump on a number which is put out by a local stringer through a Work news agency with no depth, no understanding, and that is the number that is taken. So there's a small comment. The question I have, and I apologise for being a little bit late, does the panel believe that the ink spot approach that we have in Gereshk and Ashgagar, in Sangin and Musakala of security, followed by some development and some reconstruction, is working? Or do you think that is flawed?
Okay. James, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, the ink spot strategy, which began not as an ink spot, but as ink splatter, didn't it? And that was the problem. I mean, kind of we went off to the northern areas, and suddenly we were kind of fighting on all these little spots. But it's too small. I mean, it may be working locally in Helmand, but we're talking about a region here. I mean, that ink spot has to be far bigger. We're 7 years into this thing now, and we're still talking about, Musakala and Nauzad and these tiny wee villages. I mean, so yes, I'm sure it's working in Musakala, and the army should be proud of that, I suspect, but it just is not the right strategy for a regional problem. I mean, the problem is much bigger than it was when we started this, and that's partly because the army are part of the problem, I think, and I think it's kind of a,
And also, I sorry to interrupt, but I do think it's important to point out that the ink spot theory or plan initially did not involve Musakala or Sangin.
Exactly.
And we were there at the very start when it was supposed to be a small little area, and then Engineer Dowd came under pressure, and suddenly he wanted British soldiers sent here, there, and everywhere. And the thing fell apart at the very start. Before they even had everyone on the ground, it fell apart.
Right. But in answer to your question, it's not going too badly. And I think the jury's still out. Because you have got areas of improved security where there is the space to be able to throw some development at it, to be able to let DFID spend some of its money, because there's space to be able to do that. Will development win over people, or do they see through it as being bribery to try and win them over to the government? I don't know. This counterinsurgency strategy hasn't been fully tested. It's working at the moment in the east with the American Southeast, but the question is it on life support, or is it actually working? And these are big questions about the whole counterinsurgency strategy that Petraeus has come up with in Iraq and Afghanistan. At the moment, well, yeah, it seems to be improving a bit. So let's see.
But the precedent is not good in Afghanistan, is it? I mean, look what the Russians did, how much they spent. Think about the Salang Tunnel, fantastic feat of engineering. How popular did that make the Russians? And we're not doing anything like that, in terms of infrastructure, anyway.
Just a quick question to you, Charlie. Since you've got back, what's the biggest frustration for you watching the coverage in Afghanistan, coverage of what's happening in Helmand? What's the biggest frustration for you?
Next question.
The lack of coverage by the media and the willingness, or the lack of willingness of the media to cover anything other than bombs and bullets, and not to really focus on reconstruction, development. Some of that is our fault, because, to be brutally honest, for a journalist, and any of you are journalists who want to go to Helmand, fly to Kabul, ring the Press Information Centre, cross your fingers and hope you can go down on a short visit. The chances are slim, you've got to go for diminished defence and so on. So some of it is our fault. that we're not inviting or not allowing those specialist journalists who are educational journalists and health and so on to go down. But I'd also say some of it is the fault of the media, those of you who are in media and so on, that you're actually after the story which sells the paper, which gets the front page, which makes the 10 o'clock news. As a journalist, you want to make 10 o'clock news. You don't want to do News 24 because it's not as good. And you need.
So the news channel, I think you'll find it's called now.
I'm not doing it as an example. So there's a bit of everything in here. There's a journalist who wants to make their name, and it's the editor who wants to have a good story, what sells, what gets people to watch the news. Bombs and bullets, not a school. Yeah, another school. We've done that in Iraq, we're doing Afghanistan, so what? But I'd also say that, that's the biggest frustration I had.
Thank you.
Can I
Thanks
jump in for a second?
Yeah, go.
Let me first support that, because Alastair will remember, because he was there in Kabul. I sat down.
I've still got a job then.
Yeah. I sat down with much of the press corps and said, what do I have to do to make you cover the school being built? I think it was you, or one of your colleagues, who said, even if we covered it, our editor wouldn't run it. So there is a number of editorial choices being made. Even if the journalist, who actually kind of thinks it's a good story, goes out and covers it, it doesn't make it. So that's point one. But I think I'll do a mea culpa also. We have on our side in the military a real Cold War mentality about video. We don't get out all of the video that we have that could support our side of the story because it comes from a platform, it's classified. I fought for 4 months to get video, which you can see on the NATO website, from the Dutch, which they shot from an Apache, of what the Taliban was doing when they had meetings. They have meetings, they take a little boy and they put him in front of the house. They do it every time. Or they put women on the roof. And you can see from the platform, can't shoot, can't shoot, can't shoot, and they walk away. This happens all the time. It took 4 months to get it. It was around the world, CNN, everything. And I never got anything after that. We had in the North Atlantic Council a discussion of a district center being taken over. Military put up a little shot and said, look, this is the district center. It's a little house, it's in the middle of nowhere. Yes, it's a headline, but it has no strategic significance. I said, great, I got a press conference in 2 hours. Give me that, and I'll kill the story right now. It was shot from a UAV. I said, I can get it from Google Earth. No, you can't have it. And it's like that all the time. So we also need to really change our mentality about getting into video, getting on TV, getting on the web, and we are very, very backwards in government and in the military.
Okay.
So can I defend?
One of the other issues is that.
Sorry, Charlie, do you want to sit up here?
Charlie, it's okay if we. Sorry, we can discuss this later, maybe privately. But
can I answer
the criticisms? Sorry, yeah, go on.
So I just want to answer the criticisms of bullets on Taliban very briefly. 7,900 British troops are in Afghanistan, in Helmand province. 100 have been killed. Most of them in the last 2 years. Every day British forces are fighting insurgents. We need to show that, and British public need to see that's going on. We need to put into those reports the context that explains what's going on, to use the development, what's being done, what little in some cases, what's successful, what isn't. That's the context. Yes, the bullets draw people in, and I think that is an element of it, and people do want to know that, and it's important to show. But the skill, I think, and the important part of our job is getting into that, the real context, the real discussions that we're having about counterinsurgency and about the enemy, who they are, all the rest of it, and that's what we try to do.
Just a quick note on that. If you watch Al Jazeera English, you get more reconstruction, less bullets, but anyway.
Shameless.
Absolutely shameless. Goodness me. How's Zimbabwe going?
This lady here.
Hi, my name is Caroline Holmquist. I'm doing a PhD at King's College London. Just to come back to this question of tribal structure, and I referred to an article in The Economist a couple of weeks ago where I think it was a UK British general who was making the claim that in effect tribal structure was becoming less important, that especially young individuals were becoming more atomized, etc. And I was wondering what the panelists thought of that, whether you think it's true, and what consequences that would have.
So how
for the
important
insurgency.
is tribal?
Exactly. How important are tribal loyalties if our individuals become more atomized, and how it's that going to
but imagine
affect the insurgency?
It's the sort of the elephant in the room, and actually the solution to Afghanistan is going to end up being tribal, I think. And we go on about democracy and trying to, maybe, and it's an interesting argument, is Afghanistan really ready for democracy? Maybe actually what it wants is a sort of sorted out tribal system again, and maybe that would, so maybe next year there shouldn't be elections, there should be a lawyer jirga, for instance. And I have some sympathy with that view. I think it's quite an interesting point of view, but I mean, the tribal stuff is not going to go away, and in some ways, democracy and tribalism are sort of in conflict, aren't they? Because you can't.
The strength of the tribes is amazing. I mean, just to go anywhere on a district level, like a church council equivalent here in Afghanistan, you see all these characters who are strong, debating characters. Democracy at that level is far more sophisticated than it is here in that tribal context. That's how things are sorted out. And trying to put another layer of another shura on top of the old shura to channel a different route, to make 25% of the MPs in Afghan parliament women. Phew, great idea, we haven't got that here. And what's the attitude to women like in Afghanistan? I mean, madness. So, that's my point.
John D, just quickly on this point about the tribes. Just talking about coast, the Americans seem to be getting an understanding now, and it seems to have worked in coast.
It does seem to have worked, and also down in Paktika around Burmel, there seems to be some progress there. What was interesting earlier, people were talking about the Peace Commission, and I sat with Waziri elder. Most people know the Waziris are both sides of the border, and I sat with Waziri elders, and they talked about the Peace Commission. They talked about the fact that they don't want to fight their own people anymore, and I think getting those people involved is going to be far more productive than trying to push another governor from outside the tribe. I mean, even on the reconstruction level, the coalition, particularly the Americans I've been with, come in and say, oh, what we need is a road between here and here, let's award a contract, and it goes to some guy who's not of the local tribe. He's not going to build that road. He or his people are going to end up dead or extorted at the very least. It's not going to happen. And so that seems to have changed, and the coalition and the Americans are starting to realise that it may not be an open and fair system to award these contracts, but if you do it in an open, fair way, it's just not going to get done. But if you go talk to the local elders and you say, who do you think should have the contract, where do you want it, it's more likely to happen, and that needs to be expanded.
And James, the Canadians seem to have understood that as well in the Panjwai Valley. Is it Panjwai?
Yes, it is, but I'm not sure it's the greatest example. Please go on, answer that one.
I don't speak for the Canadians, and I frankly don't know that I know enough about the specific case of Panjwai to comment on it. So I'll leave it.
I'm afraid we're coming to the end of our time. So sorry. People want to go and eat and do whatever they want to do this evening. I just want to get just a minute sum up from each of you, because the reason why we're here, and the question was, is the Taliban winning?
Are they winning? Well, they're not losing. That's all I'm going to say. And I can't, it's an unanswerable question. I think I'm pessimistic. I think they probably are. And the old cliche about watches and time and the rest of it. And I'm afraid the cliche holds good. And we are on this kind of declining glide path of consent. There's a phrase I've heard rather like, military one. And we're running out of time when the plane is landing. This is about the consent of the Afghan people, and I think we've lost it really. I think we are backing up a government in Kabul that doesn't really deserve the support of the Afghan people in some ways. They've let them down very badly, and the tragedy is that we are supporting that government. And as long as the government doesn't change its ways, I think we're in trouble.
Go on then.
He's going to do it anyway, so.
Sorry, mate. I agree completely with what you just said there.
Richard Mills.
Can you ask a question?
Photographer.
Yeah, okay, well, I was going to. But I was just thinking, I was here. James, your book, and if anybody hasn't read James's book, it's the best handle you'll ever get.
Oh, thanks. That's the puff.
No, seriously, it's just got a grip on it.
It's photography, that's what we're talking about.
But what I must say, James, you saying that we, let's look at the bigger picture. Who are we defending? Who are we supporting? And I'm going to ask James, ISAF, are we a busted flush?
Sorry, as a Canadian, what?
Are you a busted flush?
What is busted flush?
Well, you're so disjointed. You're so disjointed. In James's book, we read about the Helmand issues, the brigadier, and all that.
We don't really want to go into James's book right now.
No,
I don't know.
Can you I know you'd love that.
There's a little stand outside the door.
Can you just ask your question, please? What is your question?
Okay, is NATO a busted flush?
Has NATO had it, is what he means.
Has NATO had it?
Yeah,
Well,
have you supported chance?
it's getting bigger. in terms of numbers. It's getting bigger in terms of contributions. The Japanese are sending a recce team to see if they can send something to support it. Now, I'm not saying they're going to be fighting. No, but it's an indication that you have an almost global consensus on this mission. And so is it a busted flush? No, I don't think so. But let me answer it. I'll take my 1 minute. Is the Taliban winning? No. Popular support? No. Is popular support falling in our countries? Frankly, having read the British press at the 100th death, it wasn't all negative. I don't agree at all. There was one major negative piece and a lot that said, you know, it's tough, but we've got to keep doing it. As far as the time, as I said before, yeah, eventually the combat mission will end sooner rather than later, I imagine, 5-10 years. But at that point, the Afghans will be fighting their own fight, and we will invest in them to help them do it. So I think this can be done.
If you're so assured of victory, why is it so difficult to convince NATO member countries to send more troops?
Or to send them to areas where they're going to fight.
But in terms of sending more troops, I think we need to, and obviously you don't follow our force planning process, but we need to, the big picture for NATO is, in terms of land forces, NATO countries can deploy about 320,000 on a permanent basis. NATO countries have 270,000 now deployed. In NATO operations, UN operations, national operations, we are hitting the stretch in terms of ground force capability of the 26 countries. So are there 400,000 troops sent? No, there are not, which is why we have to train up the Afghans. But this idea that we can snap our fingers and come up, do the Brits have 10,000 more to send? No, they don't. The Canadians don't. The Dutch don't. That's the way it is. The Americans are very stretched in Iraq. So it's not just a question of whether there's great demand to send more troops. It's capabilities, which is why one of the things we do at NATO, one of the things we're going to do Thursday and Friday of this week, is talk about how we can free up more forces as an alliance to do all the kinds of things we want to do, not just Afghanistan, but everything from Chad to Darfur to all these other things that need to be done. And right now we're getting close to hitting the limits.
Sorry, the question was, are you a busted flush?
I already said no.
John D, just a brief sum up.
I think it is busted flush, and I think just putting more flags on the collection of the coalition doesn't mean that it's growing. I mean, we all know that there's a hell of a lot of troops in Afghanistan who could be contributing more, but they're not. So I'm going to leave that there. The situation in Afghanistan, I think it's really important, and this is very unpopular, but people need to get away from thinking in, again, I've been with the Americans, so I'm afraid I have to use their terminology, but get away from thinking in a presidential cycle and start thinking in a generational cycle, because that's what counterinsurgency is about. And it's not popular. Nobody wants to think that there's still going to be troops there in 10 or 15 years' time. When Dan had said it, he got torn apart in the media. I forget, but a US general said it recently, and he was pilloried as well. But that's the reality. That's how it works. Go read the manual or go study any of the previous counterinsurgencies. That's what people need to realise. But unfortunately, in an era of 24-hour news, it's very hard to get people to understand that.
Is the Taliban winning?
As I said earlier, it's a stalemate, but a stalemate will eventually, I believe, allow them to be successful.
I think you've got a very important point there in terms of the time scale. We all say, why isn't this happening now? Why do we have more troops now? We should know. We've been through Iraq. We're going through Iraq. We're going through Afghanistan. We've lost the arrogance to think that the international community, the West, can go into nations and can rebuild them and reshape them in a way that's going to, leave them in a position to be our friends forever. Isn't it all wonderful? Let's move on. That's never going to happen. We understand that now. The carpet's been pulled away from that. It will take a long time, and everyone looks towards the Dutch, 2010, 2 years, 3 years. We want results now. We want results now from the money that's being thrown in. You're not going to get results right away. It is going to take a long period of time in order to do that. Are the Taliban winning? I don't think they are. Could they? Yeah, they might well do. Most of the times that Afghanistan has led to the massacre of British force in the past, it happened like that, in a riot that started out of something very small. It could happen at any time. The whole thing could go wrong at a moment's notice. I think it will probably rumble on as it is, getting slightly worse, and maybe at the end of the day, there'll be something that kind of works, and that'll be the point for the British troops to pull out, but it'll be a long way off.
Thank you very much. I'm sure we could just continue this discussion all night
really good.
if we could, but unfortunately the Frontline Club
close us.
Unfortunately, our beers have run out.
Yeah, our beers have run out. We need more drinks.
Timing.
Thank you to our panellists. It was just fascinating hearing from you all. And thank you very much to our audience for coming here.